Thank you for joining us. My name is Rhoda Glago. Here again with my guest. We are continuing last week's conversation on leadership. I realized we couldn't finish. We still have so much to talk about, and we still talk about more after the recording. So this time we're going to continue, and then hopefully today we wrap things up. And my guest Phil,
hello,
is here, and baby is still here, but baby is sleeping right now. So once in a while you might hear the baby. Thank you. Hello. How's everybody doing? I hope you had a great week. I know I did. How about you, Phil?
It was okay. It wasn't too bad.
Cool. As last week we were talking about leadership, and I think where we left off, we were talking about the lessons that we learned. I talk about mine, and you talk about your lesson.
Yeah.
What was the lesson that you learned?
That sometimes there's a large amount of patience and, I guess, self-reflection and being capable of seeing other people's points of view that's necessary to be an effective leader. Mm-hmm. If you're unable to do that, then you're more of a dictator than a leader, which is not. I mean, it's difficult. Depending on the situation, you might need a strong hand, but most situations I find, in order for people to grow, you need more of a guide than a dictator as a leader. Yeah, so that's what I learned.
And I'll piggyback off of that. Listening is a key element in leadership. And when that is negated, or when that is not part of leadership, as you mentioned, that it becomes a dictatorship. I run into people like that a lot when I remember working in corporate America for my short-lived corporate America career.
Yeah.
I was surprised about the lack of leadership. But people thought what was being portrayed of a leader believing that their ideals were the best and the only one to be implemented, and for that reason ignored everybody else and refused to listen to anybody else. And time again I watched as things fell apart. But then when things fell apart, they were ready to point fingers to other people. Man. They never looked at themselves. And I'm thinking, wait, something is wrong.
Yeah.
Something is wrong with this picture. This individual was gung-ho on putting on the show, the other leader, and saying what I say goes. But consequences seems to not be, okay, are you willing to take the consequence that comes with what you say go?
No. Usually what happens is when something happens, or the effect that doesn't, so they expect things to go a certain way. They expect the fact that they're given orders to make things go a certain way. Mm-hmm. And when things don't go that way, the first people they blame are everybody but themselves.
Yes, and the group that they did not listen to.
Yeah.
And that makes me, honestly, it baffles me every single time that happened.
Yeah.
And, of course, I'm scared to speak up.
Well, I mean, and at that point, you're not really speaking to a leader.
No.
Right? At that point, you're not trying to solve the solution. You're just trying to avoid someone's anger.
Yeah.
But then you guys aren't working on the solution to begin with at that point. So I don't know if a leader is someone who makes people scared to speak up. Like, obviously there are consequences if you speak out of place.
Yes.
Or if you're disrespectful. I feel like speaking up and being disrespectful are two very different things. And sometimes people speak up disrespectfully and expect you to ignore it. Like, you can dissect the two things. You can appreciate that they put in their opinion, but then you can also tell them that the manner in which they put in their opinion isn't necessarily the right way, right? But sometimes people don't see that either. So then they don't speak up at all, like you said, because they're scared.
Yeah, I was scared. I won't lie.
Yeah.
I was a big chicken. I was
Yeah.
like, no, I'm not going to speak. And besides, I had just been in the office at the time. I think only a month
Yeah.
after arriving,
Yeah.
and I started picking up and almost like learning the politics or the culture that was
In the office.
in the office.
Yeah.
So coming as a freshman, that's what I would call myself.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I see all the holes. But I was so scared to speak, I kept my mouth shut.
Yeah. I guess like when you start something at the very beginning, everybody's scared to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when people don't react the way you expect them to.
Yes.
People
Yes.
get very scared to speak at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Being
Mhm.
new is also like it's very hard.
Mm-hmm.
I
It is.
feel most people would be too scared to speak on their first time in any kind of environment. But I guess that's another way you can judge how good your leader is how comfortable newcomers feel at speaking.
Yes.
Right? That's a good
I agree.
measure. That's a very good measure.
Mm-hmm.
Because if people who are new and are scared to speak up don't feel any type of way about speaking up to the person, then that means you're doing something to foster or at least encourage them. And I guess that's, like I said, if you're a guide, that aspect of encouragement being there, even if it's not like something you actively pursue, but something that you just, it's like your aura, if you will,
Yes.
promotes,
I agree.
encourages those things,
Mm-hmm.
then I guess you're a good leader.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard. It's hard, and I think one of the things we touched on the other day is when you're personally affected by the outcomes. Those are the times when it's hardest to be a leader.
Yes, yes, because being a leader, this is my personal opinion. When your ego is being put in place where your ego becomes more important for you and protecting that ego than leading the group, leading the project, or leading the situation, then the leadership changes. It's no longer about creating an environment to foster a common goal for the betterment of the community, the work environment, or the project.
Yeah. It's more competition than leadership.
Yes.
And then you lead by being number one, by beating everybody else out.
Yeah, and just for your ego, to allow your ego. Then, to me, when things get that way, there's no point.
Yeah.
Because as far as I'm concerned, there shouldn't be ego in leadership. There should be a way of understanding that the ego could be put aside and recognize that as a leader, my position is to keep guiding and looking out for where the solutions can come from. And then recognize the solution and say, hey, can we try this? And then share that with the masses or with the group that you're dealing with. And then say, this is what I'm thinking. Does anybody oppose this? Do you see anything else that could be used or that could be problematic or not? And if so, how do we address this? Is this decision I'm making for the betterment of our group? And if it's not, please enlighten me, show me. And I think that's what I recognize as good leadership, because I was always being taught, before you make a judgment about anything or before you start jumping on, I need to do this, hear from the masses or hear from the group. Allow them to speak. And I recognize that work, like I was speaking about last time about the family head. He had no reason to listen to a child. He heard the adult and he knows the adult's stance. But he gave me an opportunity to actually Actually, he granted me an audience, and I never thought he could do so.
Yeah.
So that made an impact, and it made me realize that, wow, listening to even the littlest person can bring about not only wisdom, but also a solution that works for both sides.
Yeah.
And for that, I recognize as something that I wish everyone would get an opportunity to learn. And then when it comes time to be a leader, that will be implemented.
Yeah. I think the one thing that you mentioned earlier is like pointing fingers.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard, like I said, it's hard when the outcome involves you.
Mm-hmm.
Because self-reflection is something that's very dangerous to do.
Mm-hmm.
So as a leader, once you get into that, it could like hinder the entire process if you take too long doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you self-reflect in a way that amplifies self-doubt,
Mm-hmm.
it makes you an ineffective leader, because then you're no longer confident
Mm-hmm.
in the things that you do to help you get to solutions.
Yeah.
But you also don't want to avoid self-doubt by being overly confident.
Yes.
Because then you're just playing the part of a confident person and not actually confident based on the things you've learned or read.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's kind of those elements that make consequences hard to deal with as a leader, especially when it has like a direct reflection on your ability or your capacity or something about you. When like the outcome of your leadership seems to reflect something about you, your intelligence, your integrity, your morality, any aspect of you that would be questioned based on the outcome, it's difficult to not try and point fingers at other people. Because like that's perhaps the easiest thing to do. It's almost what you do first. Like obviously it didn't work because you didn't listen to what I was saying. And then you take some time after the fact to sit and think and realize like, okay, let's say they did listen. Let's assume that they did listen to what I said. They did it as best as they could. Why did I expect them to do it better than that? Right? And sometimes that's what you're really saying when you're saying you didn't do what I said. Right? When I give you an instruction, I was expecting you to execute it perfectly to the point where nothing fails.
Yeah. So it's a follow through to make things work out to a point where things will become cohesive for both the leader and the team. But at the same time, this is what my stance. That self-reflection, as you mentioned, that may be dangerous, but it could also be something that the person needs to do before walking into the ring of leadership. I think that self-reflection of understanding themselves and recognizing where they might have limitations. And if they do, they need to know what that limitation is for themselves. I think know thyself before you come to lead somebody. Yeah. Because if you don't know that yourself, how are you going to be able to recognize what is beneficial and what is not? Because otherwise you're just second guessing everything and then throwing something in the air and hoping it should stick.
Yeah.
So I think that self-reflection needs to be done ahead of even coming to the table.
True.
To allow an opening to listen, and listening to reasoning from everyone that comes to the table is another very important way of quieting down the noise in your head and that self-doubt. Because what is going to happen is, chances are, if you've done that self-reflection, chances are you have only two things left in your mind. One, I want the situation that we are trying to resolve to work out. And two, I'm willing to take different perspective into consideration in order for that to work. These two things are very important. So I think if you do the self-reflection and peel away all these other thoughts that are coming, then you're left with only these two thoughts. So when you walk in, you're ready. And of course, because you're specifically focused on finding the best solution and the best outcome, that opening becomes available. Then you actually have an ear to listen to everybody.
Yeah.
And then when you're listening, before, like my grandma will always say, before you speak, it's always good to listen to everybody. Because when you listen to everybody, I think, she didn't tell me this, but this is what I'm thinking. That self-reflection that you've done and then made this decision before you walked into the ring has now allowed you to listen to everybody. And now that you've listened to everyone in a group, now you're going to assess all the stuff that you listen to. Does any of them make sense towards the goal? And that's where you choose which ones adhere to maintaining the solution that you want to have and have the outcome that is favorable to everybody.
Yeah.
And I think the moment you begin to do that, nobody's going to be offended at this point, because they realize that you took ideas randomly, not based on whether you like somebody or not, but it's because it worked and it makes sense. So now when you come back to the group, you can let them know. And I always remember this, that encouraging the group and letting your group know that, hey, it's a good thing everybody has something to say and something to share about this solution that we are trying to come out to, creates a sense of confidence for everybody to feel like, oh, okay, he acknowledges my presence, that I may have something to contribute. Even though that what they contributed, maybe you didn't even take it, but at least you were able to hear them, and which makes everybody feel good. And they feel like, you know what, I do matter in this organization or in this situation. And then when you make a decision, they'll back you up because you took the time to listen, considered it, and then chose the best outcome. And then chances are, by the time you start discussing why you chose that outcome and where it came from, the group start agreeing. And I think when they start agreeing and then encourage that level of listening to the group, I know that in Ghana, in the chieftaincy culture, the chief is the head in the community. Like everything goes to this royal chief.
Yes.
But it's strange, they never make a decision alone.
Well, yeah. That's actually pretty smart.
Yeah. The chief has even a spokesperson. And all of them come. Anything you take to the chief, he will never, ever make the decision and say, oh, yes, go ahead and do this. They always say, oh, is that so? Well, we are going to send for the elders or the the rest of the chiefs' cabins or whatever we call it back home will come and sit and they'll discuss it. And somebody mentioned to me, oh, things are so slow. They were so slow. And I remember going home for a funeral and they needed something. There was something that needed to be done in a town. And they said, oh, you have to go to the chief and show up. And show up and give them a little welcome gift and talk about why you're there. And when you talk about it, the chief then says, is that so? Well, I cannot accept any of these gifting you brought or any of these things and the complaints and the situation that you've brought until all the rest are there. And I remember hearing about all that and I'm like, this is annoying. They said, oh, the people had to spend the night because the chief had to call all the elders and then they had to come and talk. And then everybody had to present their side. And so because they have to present their side or what they think or why things should be done this way and all of that, by the time they finished talking, it was late that night. So the people that went to talk to the chief thinking that we're just going to drive into town, talk to him, put a couple of gifts on the floor and then say, okay, let me pour you this drink, let's all share into it and agree and that's it. That's what everybody thought, including me. No.
That's all what happened.
No, it wasn't what happened. They had to call everybody, and everybody said, yeah, well, hold up. We want to check this out first. So by the time everybody started checking out, it was late.
Yeah.
So they had to spend the night there. Of course, they didn't make any plans to spend the night. They thought. They left home at dawn, and so they were going to go to the town, see the chief, do the talking by what? 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they'll be done? No. They spent all day there. The next day, they have to go there early morning because now everybody in the chieftaincy and all his people had to come early morning, the next morning, for them to talk. And they broke bread together, ate breakfast together. Then they sat down. Then they said, okay, now our mind is clear and fresh. Let's all discuss this. And this is the situation. And after everybody spoke, then the chief made his decision and said, okay, this is what the decision I've made. Does everyone in the group agree? And then they all said, yes, we agree. Before things were done. And me coming from North America and coming home thinking, at the time, I won't lie, I thought, this is so annoying. What is this? Because I kept thinking that the North American way of doing this, you make a phone call, yeah, I want to do this and this, and I need this and this and that. They'll say yes, and that's it. It doesn't exist back home. It's always a matter of the leader you take the stuff to. You can't just walk into the town and say, I want to do this. And sometimes people say, yeah, here in North America, it's all about permits. It may be all about permits, but that's just how things are done here to make things go faster. But from what I know of, the chieftaincy back home, you can't do anything without them. You cannot break any ground without them. You must speak to them, get permission, and before you get the permission, everybody in that room has to agree. And I think it teaches you a lot of patience.
Yeah. I mean, it brings up a pretty interesting point or question about the speed of decision making and leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think maybe that's also another aspect of, I guess, leadership that you can use to measure how good leadership is. Because not every situation needs to be that long and drawn out.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, you being impatient, I feel in some ways might reflect that a part of you believe that not all these opinions were needed. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some things like you're right. Anything that involves outcomes that other people have to commit to,
mm-hmm.
I believe requires everyone to make sure that they're ready to commit to it.
Yes.
But anything in which the situation is already happening and you're committed to it, whether or not you like it or not, like there are certain emergency situations and things like that, like heat of the moment situations where the speed of leadership needs to be faster than that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes that's the problem with our concept of leadership, is that people believe that one way of leadership works in all situations.
Mm-hmm.
So you try to be overly democratic in all situations, or you totally totalitarian in all situations. But like, you have to be able to, like, for example, you grew up in two different cultures,
mm-hmm.
so you get to see the benefit of both those cultures.
Yes.
And as they begin to interact more and more, you get to see the environments and situations in which you can call upon both those things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Some people, and a lot of times, a lot of people get their, like we were talking about last week,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people get their concept of media from, leadership from media.
Yes.
And what you see is that action-packed, snappy decision-making,
Mm-hmm.
taking all the risks and getting all the rewards, no consideration for other people because,
Mm-hmm.
you're just going against the system all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and you look cool doing it.
Yeah.
But that's on TV where somebody wrote a script and the ending is always going to work out. Right?
Yeah.
But in real life, like, it doesn't, you have to make, it's not going to be written for you.
Mm-hmm.
And some days you're going to think it's the action-packed version,
Mm-hmm.
when really and truly the situation just needs to go as slow as possible.
Yes.
Right? And that's, I think, another thing that makes I guess as a leader, it's very hard. But then the person who is in the position, if you allow someone to lead you through a situation, I think you have to have an appreciation for that too. Yes. Otherwise, you become too dependent on there without realizing that, right? But the speed of decision, like you touched on, is actually pretty important. I'm a person who sometimes emphasizes speed over total consideration of everybody. Because like whenever a problem comes up, I'm already working on the solution, and believe everybody else should be on the solution.
Yeah, so you're 10 steps ahead and see why is everybody on only 2.
Right, and once I get to a solution and people are arguing about the first couple, I'm just like that doesn't make any sense. We should just skip all that. And I think that is a flaw that I've been trying to work on recently. Is try to be patient enough for people, because just because you got through the first 10 steps, you got through the first 10 steps that you can see, right? Maybe their next set of 10 cents might end in a different outcome altogether.
Yes.
And if you rush them to get through the exact same 10 steps, wow, 10 steps that you got through, they might not be going through the same 10 steps, but it's hard to be patient, and it's hard to not get offended when people don't go through the same things or have the same thoughts that you do when you're trying to solve a solution. And I guess you snap at them, but ultimately it's a work in progress, I believe.
Absolutely. I think everything is a work in progress. The main thing is being open for growth, being open for learning what lessons may come along the way. Because I think that's what, in my opinion, sometimes people block themselves and don't get the opportunity to grow through decision making and leadership for anything, because we all want to be great leaders. We all want to learn how to make decisions that will help in our work environment, home, and our community, and for our country. But the mere fact of that disconnect of not being open to learning, I think is a disservice to everybody and to yourself too.
Yeah.
And then you don't see why, taking into consideration of what is there to listen for.
Yeah.
And when that happens, I think then the true essence of leadership becomes lost.
Yeah.
I really don't know how the coming generation would understand leadership. I would, eventually, I would like to talk to somebody who's like 20 years old, 20 years old and 19 years old or something, and like ask their perspective.
Their generation is smarter than the people give them credit for.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
I believe that they're smarter than people give them credit for. The one thing, though, that I was thinking, and I don't know what I would understand, because this is something that's changed generationally, is that whole accountability thing of blame. Because from my personal experience, this is what I think. Blame gets in the way of good leadership. And that's not to say that if someone is to blame, you shouldn't call them out. But there's a time and place for everything, right? If you are constantly trying to avoid being blamed for problems, and you're constantly trying to find whoever is to blame for the problem, I don't think you'll ever get through whatever it is you're trying to work on. And a lot of times, I'll walk into a situation where both parties had an idea of how it should go. There was a miscommunication and it didn't go out the way. And the first thing someone would be like, well, you said this, so that's why I did this way. And I've seen a lot of situations where people would be like, well, I didn't tell you to do that. And then they start arguing back and forth about what was said. And then next thing you know, it's a he said, she said. And then the next hour, 2 hours, and 10,000 meetings that you have at work are all about who's to blame. Yeah,
so then the purpose gets lost in a whole, a complete detour.
Exactly.
And you're like, wait, what? This was not the purpose.
That was not the point. But then the thing is, like, one of the things I've been struggling with is is it right to always, like, for example, if I walk into that situation and I immediately hear someone blame me for a mistake that I made, my first thought is like, I don't believe I made that mistake, but in order to avoid a witch hunt, I'm just going to say yes and move on. Like,
agree to disagree and just leave it there.
Yeah. Like, I'll keep it in my mind that I'm disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
Because what I want is for us to just, like, if I say yes, can we move on to the next step? And once we're done everything and the solution is nicely packaged, then I can turn and say, well, I don't actually believe that was my error. And here is why. Okay. Right? But, like, is that the right thing to do? Because in some ways you're being, like, this is the one thing that I've always struggled with approaching the situation that way. It's like you're being fake.
Yeah, I agree with that because with you, I believe in being focused on the problem that needs to be solved. Yeah. And so I become one-track mind, because if I see something that is going on and I say, okay, this needs to be solved, because I'm always very quick to figure out what the problem is. Sometimes people will come to you with problems, but then you're like, okay, this is a lot of story and a lot of problems being thrown out. What is the main thing? Yeah. What do you need, or what do you want? Yeah. Oh my gosh, being in my line of work, you have no idea. People will come and they have no clue. Yeah. So yes, I'm quick to see. Okay, I see that you want to come here and vent and vent and vent. What do you need? And I would sometimes just go straight and I was like, what do you need, and what do you need me to help facilitate for you? Yeah. And sometimes they wouldn't know because they're hurting and all that. Yeah. Then I would be like, what do you need? So I get that way, that one track mind. We need a solution. We need a solution. We need a solution. We're stuck here talking about, and somebody wore the red dress instead of we said the color was blue. Why did they come with the red dress? Yes, they didn't adhere to the color code of the team, of the community, or of the group. Yes. But that's not the point, though. We are trying to solve this problem. We are trying to solve this problem in our community, showing that, yes, there's been a lot of crime in our community. And the leaders of the community are trying to have a town meeting or some sort of a cabinet meeting to figure out what is going on. That's what we're here for. We did decide that out of solidarity, we all wear blue, showing that
to the meeting.
We are doing this. And you showed up with the red. I get it. Yeah. That means that this person is not jiving. Maybe they have a solution. They have a reason why they wore that. But that's not a problem right now. Yeah. Let's figure this out.
I think there's a balance, because a lot of times I come across friends and family who, like you said earlier, come to you with an issue and just want to vent. And that's the hardest part for me, because I'm not like a just want to vent type person, but then you have to understand that the just want to vent type person needs to go through this step to get to the next step that you're trying to get to. And if you rush them, you're never going to get there. But then that's very hard. It is. Right? That's very hard. So, like, as a leader, that's the question, is like, but the thing is, too, you can't let them stay there for too. And I guess that's the language that once you try to let them, like, sort of permitting, like, I don't know if that's the correct language either. But you can't let that process go on for too long. And you can't let it go on for too short. Okay. I don't know if you can be too fake, if you can be too real. Like, I guess it's always a balance.
There has to be a balance in a meeting.
Like a balancing act. Yeah. Which is always difficult.
It is difficult. You know? And I find that what I usually would do in a professional standpoint, what I do is, I'll give you an example of what happened to me when I went to a client, and the client was very, very angry. There was a lot of anger, and I call it almost like venom coming out of this young person. And this person was just venting, and I sat there and listening, and I think I got overwhelmed. I got overwhelmed with so much anger and rage that was spewing out. I don't know if I checked out or not, but to me, this is when I learned this. I've read this, I've heard this, but I never actually believed it. That if you're sitting in a negative environment of somebody's coming like that, you can absorb that negativity.
Yeah, you can.
And I absorbed it so much, I felt like I was going to pass out. I started feeling nauseous. I started feeling really sweaty and hot. And I felt like I was going to go to sleep. And it frightened me because I've never gone through that. And then I kept thinking, okay, I need to go to the bathroom and splash some cold water on my face. And then I stood up and went to the bathroom and washed my hands, washed my face, splashed water on my neck, and then I became awake. Like, I felt like I became alive. And then I went back there, and then that's when I think I got a hold of my senses. And then I said, I recognize that today has been more of a venting session for you. However, I realized you needed that, but instead of having an hour session, we had 2 hours of you venting, and now we're going to 3 hours. So I don't think we'll be able to get to any solution today, or even work on any solution today.
Yeah.
So in that case, how about we stop this here, and then we'll come back next week when you've had time to reflect and then breathe. That'll give you a whole week, then we can talk. I recall going to my supervisor the next day for a supervision meeting, and then we talked, and she said, oh, anything unusual happened? And I told her the incident. She said, oh my God, that was dangerous. And I was like, what? And she said, don't you ever do that. You can absorb that level of negativity coming up from it. You can literally absorb it because it can make you sick.
Yeah.
And I said, well, it did. It made me nauseous. I felt faint. And I went and washed my face. And she said, yeah, next time somebody starts venting like that, and you know you're not able to absorb that negativity, allow the person, she said, give the person the permission to stop the session and tell them we are not going to work on anything today. Today's not going to help. Yeah. And especially after 1 hour of venting, you should have cut it out. Yeah. That's when I learned that, oh, wow, okay, venting is actually not healthy for the person or me if I'm in an area. To be honest with you, I was shocked. So, yeah, if somebody's venting like that, it's okay for you to allow them and then show them, hey, I recognize this is happening, but you could have done that from home on a phone. You could have done that with somebody else. You could have just spew on your own.
True.
You didn't need an audience. Invite me.
That's the thing. You have to balance it out. How long is too long? Like,
well, for me, it's an hour now.
Yeah. Let them go for an hour and then cut them off. Because they definitely, I guess every now and then people need it. But if they do it every time you see them, then at some point, it's just, I guess they're doing it because you're a place they can come and unload. Yes. If they abuse that, that's when you cut them off. Because they themselves probably don't even notice that they're abusing.
Yeah, of course. When people are hurting and they abuse things, they don't know that they're doing it. And sometimes even if you bring full attention to it, doesn't mean they will actually accept what you say. Yeah. And that can be difficult. So with that in mind, I think it's important to keep the goal, eye on a goal. Keep your eyes on a goal and keep that as the reason to be in a meeting. Yeah. The reason that the group is called, the reason why the chief and its people
brought together
are together to communicate what needs to be done and create a safe environment for everybody. I think that's goes without saying. And in a nutshell, I think leadership, I wish it could be redefined in our world. Yeah. Redefined where we don't get lost into dictatorship or totalitarian way of getting things done. And if that is even, does that even have things don't get done. We just get caught up in the he said, she said, and angry, and I don't believe in this policy, I don't believe in this policy, then it's like nothing gets done, no solution comes up, and then we get trapped into this loop of arguing with each one another and then pointing fingers and blame. That's the other thing I found, the blaming of each other.
Yeah. I mean, you have to go into things understanding that things might not always work. Mm-hmm. People might miscommunicate. Mm-hmm. Emotions will get in the way. Perspectives will get in the way. Mm-hmm. So when things go wrong, attempt to point at what went wrong. And sometimes, yes, it is the person who you are blaming. Yeah. And you have to deal with it. But at other times, it's just a byproduct of a mistake they made. Mm-hmm. And there's no need to nail them to the cross for it, right? Mm-hmm. Right? Deal with the issue that's gone awry and then move on. But that's something you said earlier that sparked another question is like, do we need to address leadership in a different way in schools? Mm-hmm. Is that Possibly. What it is? Like
Possibly, because...
When do you start? What kind of... Because, like, not everybody is going to be captain of a team. Mm-hmm. Not everybody is going to be leader of some group.
Mm-hmm. Or the boss.
Or class president. Mm-hmm. But I feel like everybody still needs to have some sort of awareness of what a good leader is, what a good leader is capable of. Mm-hmm. Right? Not everybody is going to be a leader, but everybody has to be capable of knowing when to be led. Yes. And when their leader is leading them awry, so that they can then themselves lead themselves. Not necessarily other people, but know when to step away from a poor leader and lead yourself, and know when to submit to a leader, because right now, that's the most effective thing to allow us to reach our goal. And I don't know when or where you start that education, or how you even start that kind of education.
I'm not sure myself, but the only thing that I can lend in this discussion probably might be starting from home, explaining that, and not only explaining it to your children or your family, but it's a matter of showing that leadership skill, because children will learn what they see. They will emulate what they see. And I think once we do that, of course, and they get into schools, they will show that. And if we start implementing good leadership skills in the home, I think it'll help. But who knows? I'm maybe a wishful thinker and a dreamer, but I think that will make a difference in our society and in our communities and our homes. Because I'm telling you, like as I said, I learned in a playground, children saying, I want to be a leader, I want to be the leader. It's just being bossy, and I'm like, wow, where did this coming from?
They just want the power.
Just the power. And it's like, no, that's not it. So I agree. Thank you so much, Phil, for coming to
no problem.
Talk.
I enjoy these talks.
Yes, and next week will be interesting. We might have another guest talk about something. Normally I don't talk about what show is going to be about or the topic. We may talk about a controversial topic a little bit. Controversial or not, but it's about, can boys and girls be friends? Yeah. Don't shoot me, I'm just saying. Okay? So that's what our topic next week is about. If you're interested, write to me at LUV, LUV4, the number 4, give, GIVE, live, LIVE, at gmail.com. My name is Sroda Aglago. Thank you very much for joining us on Love, Forgive, Live. As we close today's show, I thank you for tuning in, listening, my loyal listeners. I appreciate you a lot. Have a great week. And of course, be kind to one another. Love you. Bye.